Thank you, Simon.
Right, I will, as I say, tell me if you can't hear me, but I'm shouting as loud as I can, I'm afraid.
Wait till I finish writing. Yes, it works.
It works. Yay!
Hello. Right. 2010, we started looking at the sites that could accommodate the growth that had been set out for South Norfolk. So that included looking at sites that could accommodate the at least 1,000 houses that needed to come to the Easton Cossey area under the plan. We held 3 rounds of consultation between 2011 and 2012, and at each one of those we did actually do an exhibition in this village hall. We had about, I think over those 3 exhibitions we had about 170 people turn up attending. We also went to Sainsbury's and the Range at Longwater and the Cossey Centre, so in total we had well over 400 people attending. All of those people that responded to any of our consultations or just said that they were interested in the planning process for the location, we keep all of those details and then we inform them of subsequent consultations. We do that by email and post. We have around 50 people on our database with an Easton address who we write to. Obviously we can't tell where people who just give us an email address are based. In 2013 we had to do something called submitting the plan, which that means basically sending it off to the planning inspectorate to be checked. And at that point we write to everybody who's been involved up to that point to see if there are any issues they want the planning inspector to look at. That planning inspector looked at the plan in 2014. He held a public inquiry at South Norfolk Council, and Easton was obviously one of the locations that he looked at. He's still deliberating on that. He'll publish his report probably this summer. What that's led to is an allocation of around 900 houses for Easton as part of that growth. And what that does is it sets out an area of land which is similar to the area of land that the planning application covers, and it also sets out a policy which has got 20-odd key issues which the planning application will have to address. So the things that you would expect in terms of infrastructure provision, protecting the environment, those sorts of things. It sets out 20-odd key points which, as I say, Joe's team will take into account when they're looking at the planning application. So that's where we are at the moment. That's how we've got to an application for 900 houses coming in. And I don't know how you want to do the questions.
Well, before we start with the questions, Jonathan Bailey would like to read a statement out. If you're there, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just so you're aware who I am, I moved to the village 6 years ago. I'm a South Norfolk boy through and through. I'll probably have a bit of a Norfolk accent as well when I say certain words. About 10, 12 days ago, sort of sat at home considering the expansive development and thought, we can't have this. And I made a few contacts in the village and got on board some help to get some leaflets out, get a website prepared and bring people's attention to the feelings of the parish. We named that group Easton Against Development. We currently have 120 objections on the South Norfolk website. We have 380 e-petition objections. We are working hard. I thank the Parish Council for holding this extra meeting today. I also thank everybody here for attending. That's an overwhelming amount of support. Online, it's about 97% objecting and 2 or 3% in favour or partially in favour. Obviously, we're appealing to the Parish Council to take on board the parish feelings and put those forward to South Norfolk Council, our friends here today. Easton Against Development have prepared about 10 or 12 key questions And we very much appreciate this is an open meeting and everybody must have an option to have an opinion and put up their hand and ask a question. The 10 or 12 questions we've brought together are linked to planning, to the Highways Authority, to medical services, to education, to doubtful surveys, flooding and the Environment Agency. Key umbrella issues. They don't drill down to the individuals, like in my case. I've got an open field behind my house that could be built on, giving me a shop and a road and a main junction. I'm not happy. But ultimately, it's about getting things sorted for the village in a constructive manner, supporting the parish council to object in full to SNC, South Norfolk Council. Finally, I would like to ask the parish and the parish council if they didn't mind a handful of people from Easton Against Development standing up with these clear and concise questions to our guests, whilst other members of the parish perhaps just remain silent for a short while. I can't make you, of course, stay silent, but it would just be good if you could listen maybe for a short while to take into account some very good questions and some far-reaching and searching questions to our guests here this evening. I hope the parish council will assist in that and will support you all the way in objecting. I hope the parish as a whole will support the Easton Against Development group with 7 to 10 questions across numerous themes that affect everybody. Thank you very much.
Repetitive, so if we call upon Paul to speak first, and will you stand up and read the question so we can see who Paul is?
You
please. Can you hear me?
He's here. Do you want me to take that?
I didn't know you were Paul.
No, that's all right. Yep, I'm Paul. I live in the village. I've lived in the village 15 years. 2 children, my wife. We live in the village and feel very much members of the community here. Thank you, Simon, for talking about the Greater Norwich Area Housing Land Supply Assessment. That document's on the planning website and I've read that, and it's quite clear that within South Norfolk area we have substantial developments already approved for construction and with full planning in place. All around us at Queen's Hills we've got a large development that's not yet finished and is growing, and still yet further development to come. The Hamiltons on Deering Road is also growing. The Cringleford development, Windham, Heverset, all with full planning and all about to be built. And then on top of that, Lodge Farm, which is the further end of Deering Road up near the Longwater roundabout. All with full planning and all about to be built. South Norfolk and Norfolk Planning Authority, according to that document, set commitments of ensuring they had a 5-year supply of housing land that was already approved for planning. That currently sits at 6.74 years worth of land available with full planning, and that rises to 9.42 years if you include other land that's going through process that hasn't yet had the full planning given to it. I'm sure you'd agree with those numbers, Simon. They're in the document. So, you know, against a stated commitment of 5 years worth of future development, and clearly with so many plots of land already approved for planning, my question is all about the assessment of need. And how do the planning authority establish and consider such an expansive and unwelcome development, as the majority of people here this evening I'm sure would agree, when there simply doesn't appear to be a need? So really that's my question, you know, how will, you know, against an assessment of need and all of that, how will the planning authority deal with that?
Right, trying to think what the easiest way to answer this is, but I think 5-year land supply is a particular requirement that government makes of all local planning authorities. If we don't have what's called a 5-year supply of housing land ready to be developed, it means that our planning policies are considered out of date until we've got that supply. So if a planning application comes in somewhere where we wouldn't normally want to see development happen, we can't necessarily stop it unless we have more than a 5-year land supply. So that's where the sort of 5-year bar comes from. I think, as I said at the start, excuse me, this is a plan that runs up to 2026. So we actually need more, considerably more than a 5-year land supply. We need another 11 years to fulfil that plan. Amazing though it might seem, actually 900 houses at Easton is only about 1 year's worth of that supply. We actually are required to deliver in part of our district. South Norfolk is split into two. It's split into the area closest to Norwich and then the rest of the district. In the area around Norwich, we are required at the moment to deliver between 850 and 900 houses a year. So actually this development is only 1 year's worth. So we may have between 6 and 9 years worth, but actually that doesn't fulfil our plan up to 2026. So we do still need, unfortunately, more sites. And the last two big sites, or the locations that haven't got planning permission, are Easton and Long Stratton. And Long Stratton, I suspect we'll get a planning application for quite a considerable amount of development there later on this year or early next year. So,
thank you for that. I understand that Long Stratton are proposing 1,800 homes, and interestingly looking to use the income or revenue from that to help fund a bypass. And I think that's part of their strategy. In order to get a bypass for Long Stratton, they want the planning for the 1,800 homes. But given the stated commitment of 5 years, which I understand has now been withdrawn anyway, and given the incentives for the councils and the localism agenda and all of that has changed, doesn't just allowing even outline planning permission for more and more homes delay the construction of those sites that are already under development and just prolong the uncertainty and anguish for residents that may or may not find themselves being directly or indirectly affected by a development like this one? But thank you.
I don't think there'd be any evidence to suggest that allowing more planning permissions delays other sites particularly. I mean, South Norfolk's probably delivered more strongly than many through the sort of dip in the housing market. So, I mean, for example, Queen's Hills, as you pointed out, is now something like 1,300 houses into an 1,800 house development. The other thing that I have to point out, and is that although we have got a 6 to 9 year supply in South Norfolk, we have to look across the wider area. Under national planning requirements in the planning policy framework, there's something called a duty to cooperate, and local authorities have to cooperate with their adjoining authorities in terms of delivering housing. That's why we started out with this thing called the Joint Core Strategy that was prepared by a group of authorities, and unfortunately we are still only just at the 5 year supply for that group of authorities.
But you are there.
We are there at the moment. Unfortunately, if we don't keep putting new permissions in one end, the houses that get built in the current year, we need new permissions to keep that 5 year supply rolling. It's not a sort of static thing. We have to continue every year. We have to demonstrate that there is another 5 years worth of supply. So, as I say, we do have to keep releasing permissions to sort of feed that supply.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just come in there? Yeah. Right. So sorry, I didn't want to jump in, but my name's Margaret Dewsbury, and I'm your district councillor. So I'm the person that will speak for you when this application comes to South Norfolk. And I just want to talk about this 5 year land supply. Now, when we didn't have it, or when Norwich didn't have quite enough, and we were floundering, because if you don't have the 5 year supply, big developers can come along and put in an application, and we turn it down. They don't leave it there, they appeal to government. And if we haven't got the 5 year, I think it's 5 year plus 2% or something.
5%.
Yeah. If we haven't got that, then above us, the government, the inspector will agree that, and we have no powers as to where that planning will be and no say in it. They just say, OK, you can have it. So we've had to work really hard to get the 5-year supply in order to be able to have a say on where these different sites are, so that we have a bit more control over where the development is. So I thought I'd just explain that, and I'll do my best to help with anything else as it comes along.
Thank you.
OK?
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
All right. Whoever's next.
Can I call Claire now?
Hi there, have I got this microphone working properly? I'm Claire Chisholm, I live in Woodview Road. My question is once again regarding planning. A press release was first published in October the 28th in 2014 by the Department of Communities and Local Environment, the Home and Communities Agencies and the MP Brandon Lewis. It stated that the government has issued new guidance to councils on using local plans, which you've already mentioned, to safeguard their area against urban sprawl and protect the green lungs around towns and cities. MP Brandon Lewis is quoted as saying, "This government has been very clear that when planning for new buildings, protecting our precious green belt is paramount. Local people don't want to lose their countryside to urban sprawl or see towns and cities lost to unnecessary development. We've put local plans at the heart of the reformed planning system, so councils and local people can now decide where development should and shouldn't go. Communities welcome development if it is built in the right place and does not ignore their needs. And official statistics show that greenbelt development is at its lowest rate since modern records began in 1989. It says council will play a critical role in bringing forward brownfield land, and the government wants to see permissions in places for homes on over 90% of suitable brownfield land by 2020, paving the way for up to 200,000 new homes whilst protecting our green belt. Government policy therefore clearly states that development should be on greenfield sites only in exceptional circumstances. Considering that there are still brownfield sites available in Norwich, what are the exceptional circumstances that are allowing this development to be considered?"
I think the first thing I'd say is there is a fundamental difference between green belt and green field. Green belt is a national designation that's set out by government. Greenfield is a description of a site as opposed to brownfield. There is no green belt in Norfolk at all. The nearest place that has green belt is Cambridge. They did look at having a green belt for Norwich, but it never passed the whatever sort of regulations it had to get past. It's a long time ago now, sort of 20, 30 years ago they looked at a green belt for Norwich. But I think unfortunately that's a fundamental difference, that green belt does have a very high status in terms of protection from development, and it's not the same as a greenfield site. I think the other thing I would say is we did this plan jointly with Norwich, partly because of this reason, because we wanted to be sure that Norwich was accommodating as much development as possible on those brownfield sites. There are still 6,500 houses to be built in the city, in Norwich, partly on brownfield sites. They've got to use some greenfield sites as well at Bowthorpe. The city also have a dilemma in that they will want to protect some of those brownfield sites for other things. So if the population of the area is growing, they will want to protect some of those brownfield sites for future extensions to the city centre, for sort of city centre shopping uses, or they will want to protect them from employment. But we have been through a process of making sure that maximum use is being made at the brownfield sites that are in the city before it went out to Broadland and South Norfolk.
Now can I call upon Paul? Finally on my list.
Sorry. Last one, I promise.
I didn't know you were twice.
Yeah, sorry, Margaret, Chair. Sorry. I notice in your titles, the titles growth and localism are mentioned, and I'm sure you're aware, more so than I, that in 2011 the Localism Act was put in place, designed to give communities like ours a greater say in matters that affected us, and our families and those around us and the communities. So how do the planning authority and the elected officers weigh that in the balance when having to make a judgment about whether an unwelcomed and difficult planning decision comes before them? How much weight does 384 people on a petition, 120 written representations to the planning board, and all of that, and all these people here this evening, how does all of that carry weight and sway when you're sat having to make those difficult decisions? It'd be useful for us to understand that, please.
Thank you. Yeah, in 2011, the Localism Act was brought into place, like Paul said, and within the Act, there's basically new provisions for local communities to become more involved than perhaps potentially they were before in what happens in their area. Cringleford is a good example of that, where Cringleford Parish Council drew up a neighbourhood development plan, and within that they identified the aspirations for their area, what they wanted to see and where, and how growth would happen in their area. And that's one of the types of provisions that the Localism Act enables. It also has other provisions such as local development orders, where the local community can identify a site if they want to develop it themselves rather than waiting for a developer to take on, say, an old brownfield site. Now, in relation to how the strength of opinion on this planning application will be taken into account when we determine the application, obviously all the comments that we receive on the application will be considered. All of the issues that are raised will be detailed in the report that is eventually drawn up on this planning application. Now, as for the recommendation and the strength of local opinion, I can't predict how that's going to have an impact on the decision, because, as I said earlier, that decision will be made by the councillors on our Development Management Committee, and I can't predict what they're going to say and what they're going to think on the application. But I would say that residents, places like Cringleford that have a neighbourhood development plan, that's been brought in by the local community and has been passed through central government and then adopted, and that gives them a lot more weight into basically saying what happens in their area. The Localism Act, it's introduced a number of provisions that basically give communities a chance to draw up plans themselves, but where there aren't plans themselves, where the council has drawn up a plan, then that has to be the key consideration. Any decision that is made by council needs to be in accordance with the plans that are adopted. And in this case, we've spoken about the Joint Core Strategy, and the existing local plan, and the emerging local plan. Now, as I said, we can't determine what's going to happen to the application with the councillors, but they will need to consider it in accordance with those policies that are adopted in the plan. As Councillor Dewsbury said earlier, if we don't make a recommendation or a decision in accordance with those plans, we refuse it locally, then the applicants usually go up to central government to appeal the decision, where they will make the decision in accordance with the local plan. And so we have to act reasonably at a local level. But again, it is a democratic decision that will be made by the councillors at the end of the day.
Thank you.